Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So today, we are jumping into a deep dive on an ancient text that was honestly forged in just the absolute center of a societal pressure cooker.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really intense section.
Yeah, we're looking at a highly detailed analysis and commentary on a very specific section of the Holy Qur'an. Specifically, it's chapters 40 through 46.
Right. And this group of chapters, they're collectively known as the Hawamim.
The Hawamim. Okay. And our mission today is to essentially act as your thoughtful guides through these texts. We want to help you, the listener, really extract the practical wisdom, the moral insight, and, well, the real-world life application from all of this.
Exactly. The goal is to look right past the centuries, to find those reflections on human nature, on power dynamics in society.
Because honestly, they are just stunningly relevant to whatever you might be facing today. Like, the parallels are wild.
They really are.
Yeah.
But to begin, I think we have to establish the environment where these words were first spoken. Give it some context.
For sure. Context is everything.
Right. So these 7 chapters, the Hawamim, and by the way, they're named that because they each begin with the Arabic letters Ha and Mim.
Oh, okay. Ha, Mim. Got it. Yeah.
So they cannot be separated from the really intense historical moment of their revelation. According to the commentary, all of these chapters belong to a very specific, incredibly volatile period in Mecca.
Okay, set the scene for us. What was going on?
Well, this was the early phase of the faith, and persistent, determined, and just highly organized persecution of the early Muslims had really kicked off.
And I think we should probably clarify what persecution actually meant in 7th century Mecca, because I feel like it's super easy for a modern listener to hear that word and imagine like a few harsh words or maybe getting canceled on social media.
Right, like social ostracization. But no, the historical record points to a literal existential threat.
Like life or death.
Completely. It was a systematic attempt at eradication. I mean, Mecca wasn't just a city with neighborhoods. It was this tightly woven socioeconomic hub that was built entirely on tribal alliances.
Right.
And trade, So to be cut off from your tribe, which is what was happening, that meant losing your economic livelihood entirely.
Wow.
You lost your legal protection, your physical safety. The text outlines a situation that escalated into actual physical danger. Severe boycotts.
Wait, boycotts? Like people wouldn't sell them food?
Exactly. Starvation was a real tactic, and it eventually culminated in what the commentary notes as the early believers' first flight to Abyssinia.
Okay, so let's give a brief geography check on Abyssinia for those who might not know the history. We are talking about modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, right? Across the Red Sea.
Precisely. So the early Muslims were essentially forced to become refugees.
Just to survive.
Yes. They had to leave their homeland, any wealth they had, their extended families, and literally cross the sea to seek asylum under a Christian king in Abyssinia.
That's incredibly intense.
Because of that extreme context, the overarching themes across all 7 of these Hawamim texts are super tightly focused.
Okay, what's the main focus then?
They are designed to offer solace to the persecuted, issue a really stark warning to the oppressors, and ultimately declare the failure of those opposing forces. The commentary even cites a saying of the prophet that links the letters Ha-Mim to a promise of divine protection when you're under attack.
Man, that paints such a vivid picture. I mean, just imagine trying to maintain your own core, non-negotiable values or start your life's mission while the absolute most powerful, entrenched societal institutions in your city are actively trying to destroy your livelihood.
Right, and run you out of town.
Yeah. So the question really becomes, and I'm asking this for the listener too, does this intense, almost cinematic level of historical context make the text less applicable to a modern person? Like someone just dealing with mundane office politics or a toxic corporate environment?
I would actually argue the exact opposite.
Really? How so?
Well, the intensity of the original context basically stress tests the principles being taught. The opponents in the commentary are historical figures, sure, like the aristocratic leadership of Mecca, but psychologically, they represent any overwhelming external pressure that attempts to force you to abandon your integrity.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
What this text provides is a blueprint. It's a blueprint for maintaining internal spiritual integrity when your external conditions are overwhelmingly hostile.
So it scales down.
Exactly. It scales perfectly. If these principles could sustain a group of people forced to flee across a sea as refugees, They hold immense value for navigating a modern boardroom where you're being, marginalized just for doing the right thing.
That makes perfect sense. It's basically teaching you how to build a fortress inside your own mind when the outside world is actively trying to break you down.
Exactly.
And I think that concept transitions us perfectly into a really specific narrative the text uses to illustrate this kind of resilience. Because it doesn't just keep it abstract, right? The source material zooms in on a story about standing up to ultimate power.
The narrative you're referring to is found in chapter 40. The chapter is titled Al-Mu'min, which translates to the believer.
Yeah.
And it references a very specific individual in the history of Moses.
Right.
But the text makes a really fascinating choice here. It doesn't focus on Moses confronting Pharaoh from the outside.
Which is the story we all know.
Right, the traditional narrative.
Yeah.
Instead, it focuses on, and the commentary describes it exactly like this, a believing man of Pharaoh's people who hid his faith.
Wow. Okay, so we are looking at an insider.
Yes, someone deeply embedded within Pharaoh's court.
A member of the establishment who has basically secretly accepted the truth but hasn't gone public yet.
That is exactly the dynamic. And when Pharaoh decides he wants to literally kill Moses, this hidden believer steps up. But he doesn't launch like an armed rebellion.
What does he do?
He attempts to use clear, rational arguments to stop the machinery of the state. He asks Pharaoh, essentially, will you slay a man just because he says, my Lord is Allah, and he has brought you clear arguments?
So he appeals to logic.
He does.
Yeah.
He uses the evidence presented, trying to navigate this incredibly dangerous environment from the inside out.
Translating this to the 21st century for a second, this hidden believer is basically the ancient equivalent of a corporate whistleblower.
Oh, 100%.
Or like a dissenting voice within a corrupt administration. You are on the payroll, you have the security clearance, you are sitting in the actual meetings where the terrible decisions are being made.
Right, you're at the table.
Yeah. And the text explores how you stop the machine without immediately being crushed by it. It's about navigating a toxic environment where the power imbalance is completely skewed against you.
And the nature of that power is explored really deeply in the commentary. Early in chapter 40, the text references the angels who bear the arsh.
The arsh, what does that translate to?
Well, it's typically translated into English as throne. And people usually visualize it as a literal material seat of power.
Right, like a massive golden chair in the sky that represents absolute authority.
Exactly. But the commentary, specifically in footnote 2.174, goes out of its way to dismantle that literal interpretation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it states clearly that those who bear the arsh are not bearing any physical material thing. Rather, they are the bearers of some profound responsibility with respect to divine power.
Okay, so the throne is a metaphor.
It's a metaphor for the weight of executing the affairs of the world in alignment with truth.
That completely reframes the entire concept of leadership. Like, power isn't a physical object. It's not the corner office or a title you sit on.
Not at all.
It is the weight of responsibility you bear. And if you view power as ownership or dominance, you are basically acting like Pharaoh.
Exactly. You've missed the point of power entirely.
Whereas the hidden believer understands that true power, the kinds actually aligned with the arsh, is the courage to bear responsibility for the truth, even when it is a massive liability to your own safety.
Pharaoh fails to understand the mechanics of power. He thinks power gives him the right to act without consequence. The hidden believer recognizes that power is intrinsically tied to consequence and accountability.
Man, so the practical application for you listening right now is to identify where in your life you are acting as the hidden believer.
That's a great reflection.
Right. Like, are there spaces at work, in your community, maybe even in your extended family where you hold a certain amount of responsibility, your own personal arsh, but you are remaining silent while poor or unjust decisions are made?
Because you're afraid to speak truth to power.
Exactly. And the practice here isn't necessarily to burn the institution to the ground. The practice is identifying just one area where you can use clear, logical arguments to challenge an unjust norm in your environment. Like, how can you leverage your inside position to introduce friction into a bad process?
And the text suggests that introducing that friction is absolutely necessary. Because failing to act justly has severe, unavoidable consequences.
Right.
The narrative shifts here from external oppressors, like Pharaoh, to the ultimate form of internal accountability. The text basically forces the reader to confront what happens to the human being when they consistently act against the truth.
And this shift is honestly one of the most conceptually heavy parts of the source material.
It really is.
Because in chapter 41, which is titled Fusilat, meaning made plain, the text presents this striking, highly countercultural image of the day of reckoning. It states that on that day, a person's own ears, their own eyes, and their own skins will bear witness against them.
And for a modern reader, the immediate reaction is often to just dismiss this as archaic apocalyptic horror.
Oh, yeah. The idea of talking body parts taking the witness stand in some surreal cosmic courtroom sounds wild.
It sounds like a medieval metaphor designed purely to frighten people into compliance.
It sounds like a horror film. But this is where the commentary steps in and provides a really profound layer of discernment, right? It moves us past the literal imagery and into the psychological reality.
Exactly. Footnote 2206 addresses this directly. It advises the reader not to view this as a literal courtroom drama.
Okay, so how should we view it?
Well, it points out a deep spiritual and psychological mechanism. The commentary explains that the consequences of evil deeds become manifest in the very parts and faculties which were employed in their performance.
Wait, can you break that down a bit?
Sure. Just as in the material world where every physical action has a physical consequence, the same rule applies to the spiritual and mental state of a person.
Oh, wow. We can map this almost perfectly onto our modern understanding of psychology and neuroscience.
Yes.
I mean, we have a popular framework today articulated by the phrase, the body keeps the score.
Exactly that.
We understand trauma, chronic stress, and cognitive dissonance in ways that align beautifully with this ancient text. You cannot hide your actions from your own nervous system.
The mechanics are just fascinating. The commentary notes that this is the absolute truth of the law. The consequences manifest in the faculties themselves. If a person spends their life engaging in deceit or suppressing their own conscience, that behavior isn't just filed away in some abstract mental folder.
Right, it doesn't just disappear.
No, it alters their physiology.
It rewires the nervous system, the stress hormones, the elevated cortisol, the physical tension held in the skin and muscles. Your body literally physically bears the weight of those actions.
Your very being is altered by what you do.
Yeah. Your eyes are shaped by the media they constantly consume. Your ears are tuned by the rhetoric they listen to.
And this ancient concept obviously predates our modern knowledge of neuroplasticity, but it's describing the exact same phenomenon. True accountability isn't just a judge reading a list of your crimes.
Right.
It is the reality that your physical and spiritual self has been irreversibly shaped by your choices. The text is forcing this realization that there is no such thing as a truly hidden action.
To make this even more tangible, consider the modern digital footprint. That is, to me, the ultimate 21st century parallel to your eyes and ears testifying against you.
Oh, that's a terrifying thought.
Right. Every single thing you have looked at, every video you've watched, the time you spend hovering over certain images, the angry comments you type out in the dark, it is all permanently recorded.
Your algorithm is a perfect mathematical reflection of your desires.
Yes, and your habits. If your search history and your algorithm were projected on a screen, they would testify exactly to who you are without you ever opening your mouth.
It really forces a confrontation with the self. Because if society cannot see your actions, your nervous system and your environment still record them. And the accumulation of those choices creates the reality you actually inhabit.
So the practical reflection for you here is to do a personal audit. Think about your physical and digital footprint today. If your daily habits, what your eyes focus on, what your ears absorb, the physical stress you carry in your skin, if they were to take the stand and testify about your priorities right now, what story would they tell?
Are they telling a story of growth and intentionality?
Exactly. Or are they telling a story of distraction, outrage, and low-level harm?
And recognizing that level of individual vulnerability to corruption naturally leads to a structural question in the text.
Which is?
Well, if individual accountability is so high, and the human being is so easily shaped by negative environments, how should a community organize itself? How do we build structures that protect us from our own worst impulses or prevent the rise of the next Pharaoh?
That is a crucial pivot. And this inquiry brings us to chapter 42, which is titled Shura, which translates to the council.
Right.
And the core wisdom laid out here is an explicit directive that the affairs of the believers must be decided by council. This isn't framed as a suggestion, it's a foundational requirement.
And the historical context of this directive is monumental. It really is. We have to look at the mechanics of 7th century Arabian society.
Okay, what was the structure like?
It was an environment built almost entirely on absolute tribal autocracy. The tribal chief made the final call, period. and unquestioning obedience was required for the survival of the group in a really harsh desert environment.
So it was just top-down absolute rule.
Completely. So the idea of institutionalizing consultation, of systematically gathering diverse voices to make a decision, that undermined the very foundation of autocratic rule.
And the commentary goes into significant depth on how radical this was, right?
It does. Footnote 2230 points out that this injunction laid the groundwork for governance by parliaments. It notes that this idea found practical expression in the early days of the caliphate.
And for the listener, the caliphate refers to the system of leadership that succeeded the prophet.
Exactly. In its early days, it utilized a majlizi shura, or council, to conduct state affairs long before modern European nations adopted parliamentary systems. It was designed as this revolutionary safeguard against unchecked solitary power.
The text also places this in a massive comparative context, doesn't it?
Yes. Specifically in footnote 2220, it mentions that this principle, this religion of humanity, as it calls it, is the same basic principle preached by Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus.
Wow.
The idea of a just community making decisions collectively isn't isolated to this one text. It's presented as a broader, universal human pursuit across multiple wisdom traditions.
That is beautiful. But I want to push back on this a little bit. Because council sounds highly evolved and utopian on paper. But in the real world, like in business or crisis management council, can be horribly inefficient.
I see where you're going with this.
Right. Like, we all know that committee meetings are often where bold, necessary ideas just go to die in the name of consensus. Sometimes a group is paralyzed by indecision, and you just need a leader to look at the data, ignore the noise, and make a hard call. Doesn't mandating council risk paralyzing the group?
That is the standard modern critique of bureaucracy, for sure. And it's valid if council is implemented poorly. But the commentary's definition of Shura does not advocate for leadership by committee or absolute consensus.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, absolute consensus usually leads to the lowest common denominator of decision-making. Council exists to introduce deliberate friction to the leader's ego. It is an immunity measure against the Pharaoh syndrome we discussed earlier.
So it's about checking blind spots rather than stripping the leader of their authority.
Exactly. A leader is still required to make the final call, but they are ethically bound to subject their initial assumptions to the scrutiny of other minds first.
That's a vital distinction.
The goal of counsel isn't necessarily speed. It is the mitigation of catastrophic error. When a leader skips the counsel phase, sure, they might move faster, but they're far more likely to drive the organization off a cliff because no one was empowered to warn them that the bridge was out.
Right. Counsel ensures that the leader bears the responsibility with a full understanding of the reality on the ground.
Exactly.
That makes the concept highly practical for the listener. You don't have to be running a nation state to need a shura. You need to build your personal board of directors.
I love that framing.
Think about who you consult before making major life decisions. Changing careers, moving cities, ending a relationship. Do the people on your council have the intelligence and the courage to actually disagree with you?
That's the real test.
Right. Because if your personal counsel just nods and validates every thought you have, that isn't a shura. That is an echo chamber, and it will eventually fail you.
It absolutely will.
Yeah.
But even with the best counsel, human interaction guarantees that conflict will still occur. Communities will fracture, people will cause harm, and wrongs will be committed.
That's just human nature.
Right, and the text anticipates this. It offers a deeply nuanced framework for handling conflict and seeking restitution.
And this framework is also detailed in Chapter 42. It presents a specific balance for conflict resolution. It states a foundational rule. Evil must be requited by punishment proportionate to the evil.
So proportionality is key.
Yes. If a wrong is committed, the consequence must match the severity of the act. But, and this is a huge but, it immediately follows that statement by adding that whoever forgives and amends will have their reward from God.
And to understand the gravity of this, we really have to examine footnote 2232. This provides a critical layer of discernment.
What does the footnote say?
The commentary contrasts this Quranic injunction directly with the Christian teaching of turning the left cheek when the right is smitten. The author of the commentary argues that a mandate of absolute unconditional forgiveness in every single instance is fundamentally impracticable for maintaining a just society.
So it's pushing back against absolute pacifism.
Yes, because it's addressing the reality of bad faith actors. If you are dealing with an aggressor who genuinely enjoys causing harm and your only response is to absorb the damage, The aggressor learns nothing.
Right. You aren't creating peace, you are just providing them with a punching bag and enabling further violence.
Exactly. And the commentary grounds this deeply in the historical reality of the Arabian Peninsula at the time. There were tribes accustomed to slaughtering entire populations over the most trifling offenses. Blood feuds could last for generations.
Wow. Generations.
Oh, absolutely. So if a newly formed community adopted a policy of absolute pacifism in the face of that specific kind of aggression, it would be viewed as weakness. It would only embolden the oppressors to commit genocide.
So self-defense was a literal necessity.
Right. Therefore, the text establishes that seeking proportionate justice, which encompasses self-defense and restitution, is a fundamental human right, and it's a societal necessity to halt the spread of evil.
It acknowledges the necessity of boundaries and consequences, but it deliberately stops at proportionality. It strictly forbids going beyond the initial harm, which is what cuts off the cycle of the blood feud.
It creates a ceiling for retaliation, but it does not mandate retaliation. The footnote clarifies that while proportionate justice is a right, forgiveness remains the higher moral victory.
But there is a massive, highly specific condition attached to that forgiveness, right?
Yes. The object kept in view must be to amend.
This is the crux of the philosophy. Forgiveness is encouraged when it actually leads to the wrongdoer changing their ways, repairing the damage, and restoring peace. If offering forgiveness simply allows the person to continue abusing you or exploiting the community, then it is not a moral victory. In that scenario, proportionate punishment is the morally correct course of action because it stops the harm.
It's incredibly practical.
It is an incredibly pragmatic moral framework for the listener because it completely rejects toxic positivity. You know, that modern idea where you are pressured to forgive everyone immediately and just suppress your own pain.
Yes, that can be so damaging.
It validates your right to justice and self-defense, but it also condemns revenge, the desire to hurt someone simply because they hurt you, and it elevates restorative forgiveness as the ultimate goal, but only when it actually solves the root problem.
It demands profound emotional intelligence and situational awareness. You have to really analyze the nature of the person who wronged you and determine which response will actually lead to amendment.
So think about a conflict in your life right now where you feel you've been wronged. Be radically honest with your motivations. Are you seeking proportionate justice to fix a boundary issue? Are you secretly seeking revenge because you just want them to suffer? Or are you aiming for amendment and peace?
That's a hard question to answer, honestly.
It is. But before you react, ask yourself, which response, enforcing a strict consequence or offering unexpected grace, is actually going to heal this specific situation?
Now, if a society can balance justice and forgiveness, and if it operates by counsel, it achieves a really high level of function. But the source material identifies an ultimate trap that still derails human beings, even when all the external structures are healthy.
The final boss, so to speak.
Right. The text points directly to our internal psychology, specifically our relationship with materialism and internal desires.
This brings us to chapter 43, titled Az-Zukhruf, which translates to the embellishment. This chapter contains a perspective on wealth that is genuinely shocking, especially to a modern ear conditioned by consumer capitalism.
It really pulls no punches.
No, it doesn't. The text states unequivocally that gold and silver have absolutely no value whatsoever in the sight of God.
And the commentary elaborates on this very forcefully. Footnotes 2244 and 2245 explain the text's assertion that if it wouldn't cause all human beings to become unbelievers out of sheer envy, God would have given the worst oppressors houses with silver roofs, stairs of silver, and doors of silver.
The imagery is just stunning. The text is literally saying that wealth is so spiritually meaningless that the divine would hand out actual mansions of silver to the most corrupt people on earth, just to prove how utterly worthless those materials are to spiritual greatness.
It is a radical devaluation of material wealth as a metric for human worth, or divine favor for that matter.
Right.
The commentary notes that the criterion for greatness is moral worth, not external accumulation. Gold and silver are referred to merely as embellishments. They are a passing illusion, a temporary decoration on the stage of a much larger existence.
To understand the mechanics of this, look at how we function today. We use wealth as the ultimate metric of human success. We tie our self-worth, our social status, and how we judge others entirely to these embellishments.
Oh, constantly.
We look at a billionaire's lifestyle, and our brains are wired to perceive that as the absolute pinnacle of human achievement. And this ancient text looks at that exact same billionaire and says, That wealth is so inherently devoid of value that God would give it to a tyrant like Pharaoh just as a joke if it wouldn't confuse the rest of you.
And the reason God doesn't do that, according to the text, is human frailty. The economy of envy would destroy society.
Wow, the economy of envy.
If humans saw the worst people consistently rewarded with immense material wealth, their psychological need for status would drive them to abandon all moral frameworks just to acquire the silver roof.
And chapter 45, specifically in footnote 2279, connects this obsession with embellishment to an even deeper psychological trap. The text asks a really piercing question. Have you considered him who takes his low desire for his God?
The phrasing there is critical. Taking your desire for your God. When the pursuit of wealth, status, or even just the neurological dopamine hit of social media validation becomes the ultimate organizing principle of your life, those impulses become your deity.
You essentially worship them.
You worship them by sacrificing your time, your energy, and your moral boundaries to serve them.
You tithe your life to your desires.
That's exactly it. The commentary notes that when this happens, the heart and the mental attitude are completely sealed off from higher truths. The God of low desire demands total myopic focus on the immediate, the material, and the self.
Leaving no room for anything else.
Right. It leaves no cognitive bandwidth for spiritual development, for justice, or for the kind of long-term thinking required to build a genuinely meaningful life.
This requires a brutal, necessary audit of your own life. Look around at your embellishments. Are you judging your success or the worth of the people around you by the modern equivalent of silver roofs? Are you sacrificing your peace of mind, the quality of your relationships, or your integrity to serve the God of low desire?
It's a sobering thought.
It is. What would shift in your daily routine if you truly internalize the idea that your net worth or your social status has zero correlation with your actual worth as a human being?
And overcoming that illusion learning, to see past the silver roofs and rewire the brain away from low desires, that takes an immense amount of time.
Right, you don't just wake up one day and fix it.
No, it requires a level of cognitive and spiritual maturity that the text suggests simply doesn't happen overnight, regardless of a person's raw intelligence.
The source material actually addresses this developmental timeline explicitly in chapter 46, Al-Akaf. The text discusses human development, the struggle of growing up, and the concept of gratitude. It mentions that full intellectual strength and spiritual maturity are usually reached at a very specific milestone, the age of 40.
Yes. Footnote 2287a highlights this developmental marker. It states, "It would appear from this that the spiritual maturity of man usually takes place at the age of 40.
Age 40.
Yes. It also notes that the prophet himself received the first revelation at age 40. Within this tradition, 40 marks a very clear transition point in the human lifespan. It's the moment when the faculties are finally fully integrated.
The contrast between this ancient view and our modern cultural narrative is honestly jarring. Today, turning 40 is treated as a punchline.
No, it's the official start of the midlife crisis.
Exactly. It's the age where culture tells us we should panic about declining physical youth, buy things we can't afford to feel young again, like a sports car, and just mourn the loss of our 20s. We view aging almost exclusively as a trajectory of decline.
But the text offers a completely inverted paradigm. It does not view 40 as the beginning of the end. It views 40 as an arrival.
A midlife awakening?
Yes. It's the stage where a human being has finally gathered enough life experience, endured enough failures, and gained enough perspective to truly understand the complexity of the world.
That makes a lot of sense.
It is the point where the brain has the capacity for profound, unselfish gratitude, specifically toward one's parents, as the text mentions, and the intellectual strength to make a lasting ego-free commitment to doing good.
It's the idea that the first 39 years are just the training ground. You are just gathering data. At 40, you finally have the processing power to use that data wisely.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
So for the listener, whether you are approaching 40, currently in your 40s, or well past it, how are you framing your own aging process? Are you mourning the superficial loss of youth, or are you stepping into the authority of your maturity?
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. The text challenges us to view aging not as a decline of youth, but as the arrival of true spiritual and mental capacity. Your most impactful years aren't behind you. They are the years where you finally understand the mechanics of life.
And arriving at that maturity requires trusting the process of growth, which is a theme that underpins all the chapters we've discussed today. The universe itself operates on this principle.
And that is exactly where we want to leave you today, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you navigate your week. In chapter 41, when discussing the creation of the heavens and the earth, the text in footnotes 2199 and 2201 makes it a point to emphasize that creation was done in periods or stages.
Right. It evolved over time from a vapor.
The divine laws working throughout the cosmos operate on the principle of gradual development. Even the universe wasn't instantaneous.
It required epochs of time and patience to reach its mature form.
If the creation of the cosmos required stages, friction, and immense amounts of time to reach stability, why do we demand that our own spiritual growth happen overnight? Why do we expect our healing from trauma or our efforts to readjust communities to be instantaneous? The wisdom here is to recognize the necessity of the process. Give yourself the grace of time. That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.